Coming up next on this special co-production of Arizona Horizon and Horizonte, we'll take an in-depth look at NAFTA. We'll see how NAFTA affects Arizona businesses and consumers, and we'll talk about what a renegotiated NAFTA might look like. That's next on this special edition of Arizona Horizon and Horizonte. Welcome to this special co-production of Arizona Horizon and Horizonte. I'm Ted Simons.
And I'm Jose Cardenas. The North American Free Trade Agreement for NAFTA was signed in 1994. Its stated goal is to establish the freest trade possible between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Recently, the trade deal has come under fire from President Trump, who's called it the worst trade deal ever.
Now, Arizona fares better under NAFTA than many states due to our proximity to Mexico. In fact, about 2/3 of the produce we eat crosses Arizona's southern border through Nogales. We talked to Wholesome Harvest, a family-owned binational company with operations on both sides of the border. They say any changes to trade will impact consumers.
We cannot produce the same crops year-round in the U.S. In the summertime, the U.S. and Canada are able to produce a lot of our own food. We have the climate for it. But come winter, like, you're not growing Roma tomatoes in Wisconsin. It's just a fact of climate.
Why they plant corn in Iowa? Because it grows really well. So why would I put like cucumbers in Iowa? They won't work over there.
You're not going to be eating the same things that you would, let's say, if trade with Mexico was restricted. It's a basic fact.
If they start, raising those prices, we probably, gonna sell less. If we don't sell that much, we have less work. We don't need that many people, we don't need that much people, so we need to cut jobs too.
It will be really heartbreaking to have to lay off some people or stop growing our business because of something that it is completely out of our hands.
We don't need that many people because we are not gonna have that much work. So, they're worried about that.
Produce, and I think food in general in North America, depends on a cycle. And this is where I think the most damage stands to be done with this. And so there's this complementary cycle. When we're not producing tomatoes in Wisconsin, we're producing them in Mexico. And that allows us to provide fresh tomatoes year-round in the U.S.
Let me do what we do best, and I will let you guys do what you do best. If we are the guys doing the best tomatoes, we can give you the tomatoes, you give us the potatoes.
As we've just seen, some Arizona companies have done well under NAFTA, but some rural businesses are not seeing the same benefits. Here to help us sort through the trade deal is Lorenzo Sierra, Policy Chair for the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Garrick Taylor, Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Communications for Arizona Chamber of Commerce, and Arizona Representative Mark Fincham. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on Horizon Horizonte. Garrick, give us a quick overview of NAFTA. Tell us what it's all about.
Well, it's a three-nation trade bloc of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It's been in place for nearly 25 years. It came online at the beginning of 1994, and it was brought online under the Clinton administration, but negotiated by the George H.W. Bush administration before that. Before NAFTA came online, the U.S. and Canada traded cross-border in a manner that was mostly tariff-free. And then with the expansion to NAFTA, the three-nation trade bloc, it brought Mexico into the fold. So the idea was to have a free trade agreement by that you push these tariffs down that were usually attached to products that were going back and forth.
Lorenzo, the impact of NAFTA on the Arizona economy, what are you seeing out there?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Arizona's fared much better than a lot of the some of the other states in the country, especially when you look at some of the Rust Belt ones where some of that manufacturing jobs got lost. But some of the stats that I've seen on this show that we have a net surplus trade with Mexico. And over at the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, seeing that trend, we've been doing some research on that, and we've also been putting together some best practices to help our members learn more about exporting so that they can grow their business by doing business with folks in Mexico.
Representative Fincham, do you think NAFTA needs to be terminated, revised? What would you do?
Well, I think that anytime you have an agreement that's 20 to 25 years old, things have changed. When NAFTA first came on, we didn't have the prolific internet resources that we have. We didn't have some of the other things that are going on in the marketplace. So I think that it probably is time to revisit it, see if it needs updating. While I was doing research for this appearance, I learned something rather interesting. There's more complaints with Canada than there are with Mexico under NAFTA. That's an interesting, I didn't know that before. So those complaints, I think what's really important is to drill down into those complaints and find out what's driving the complaint itself. We may find that there are one or two things that are actually causing the rub, and if that's something that can be easily renegotiated, then I think that it's time that you open that up and try to work through whatever that is. Because the whole idea is to encourage trade, not get the people closing down and withdrawing from the market.
Garrick, what are some of the problems here? Because I got to tell you, to try and find people against NAFTA is difficult, especially in this part of the world, but there are folks who have problems. What are those problems?
Well, we would approach NAFTA with the viewpoint of amend it, don't end it. We think it's largely been a positive. In fact, we think that these arguments that there are these negatives out there, well, we just don't see them. As Lorenzo mentioned, there was some churn in the economy in the early days of this agreement. But a lot of the changes in the economy we can ascribe mostly to automation, not because of trade. And so this idea that we ought to exit the agreement or dismantle it, we would push back against that. We would say modernize it, but don't leave it.
So Lorenzo, even the Mexicans agree that NAFTA needs to be looked at again. What difference does it make if we start from scratch, as President Trump first proposed, or if we go through this long series of renegotiations?
Well, I think part of the problem is when Trump is talking about NAFTA, and I'll check my Twitter to see if there's any changes between now and the end of the show, is that we really don't know where he's coming from or what's going to happen with that. One day he's talking value-added tax. The other day he's talking maquiladores. So, you know, once we figure out what we want to do with that, but in terms of what Mexico's wanting, you know, part of when we got the agreement originally, Mexican trucks were allowed to come into the United States. Since then, Congress has forbid those Mexican trucks to come there. I think Mexico would like to have the ability to bring their trucks into the United States to provide, bring product into the States. I think those are some of the changes that we're looking at. But in terms of whether we should just scrap it altogether, I'm with Garrick. Let's amend, not get rid of it altogether.
And we should note Arizona lawmakers are hoping to convince President Trump not to meddle too much with NAFTA. Our senior Senator John McCain released a statement that says, in part, I'm deeply concerned by President Trump's statements today reaffirming his commitment to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement. While renegotiations could help to strengthen and modernize NAFTA to benefit American businesses and consumers, any effort to restrict or impose new barriers on our ability to trade with Mexico and Canada could jeopardize the future of this trade agreement and have serious consequences for Arizona and the country. Representative, serious consequences in your district? What, South Phoenix, southern parts of the valley to the northern parts of Tucson generally?
No, a little bit further south. So northwest Tucson, including Oro Valley, Marana. Marana is very much an agricultural community.
Yes.
Arizona City, which is hosting feedlots, dairy farms, egg farms, all the way up to Maricopa City. So what the impact might be, we have a very close trade relationship with a lot of folks in Mexico. Tucson is a center, you know, for example, Arizona Mixers. They will bring truckloads of produce in, break those large loads up so that this is all the just-in-time shipping to the grocery stores. I mean, the people in other countries marvel at how quickly we get fresh produce onto the shelves. From the time it's picked to on the shelves, sometimes less than 24 hours. So I think that we've got to be very cautious in any negotiation. I don't know what's on Mr. Trump's mind, so obviously, and I would not want to try and guess. I think the point is the renegotiation piece. Mexico has issues, America has issues, Canada has issues. All right, let's again take a look at what are the common challenges, and let's go after solving those problems. I think that the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, sorry, it's trite, but it's true. Mm-hmm. There are parts of the agreement that are working, and as you said, it's hard to find people that don't like it, but it's easy to find people that don't like pieces of it. That's the important thing, I think.
Garrick, is the senator and many of the rest of the country, people in the country, overreacting to President Trump's comments? Isn't he just setting up the negotiations and probably putting us at an advantage when those negotiations do occur?
Perhaps this could be this issue with the president we sometimes have of do you take him seriously or do you take him literally, and maybe this is a case of trade. I would say, though, that there would be some fairly grave consequences if we were to exit this agreement. Let's keep in mind how integrated our supply chains are in things like the auto industry. Lucid Motors announced earlier this year that they're going to set up operations in Pinal County. Why? One of the reasons they cited was our connection to the auto industry, that supply house in Sonora. And so we really risk upsetting the apple cart if we were to simply exit this agreement without a true renegotiation.
Real quickly, Lorenzo, business-like certainty. Some of these comments from the president, not necessarily a good thing for certainty. Problem, do you think?
Exactly. So one of the things that came up, and I can't remember when exactly was, he was talking about getting out of NAFTA and then imposing a 35% surcharge on Mexican imports. Now, when you think about some of the things that come in from there, that's just going to devastate our consumers, as some of the folks said, not to mention just the price of gas and other just basic consumables that we have.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Coming up next on this special co-production of Arizona Horizon and Horizonte, we'll take a look at what a renegotiated NAFTA might look like for Arizona.
Heaven knows you're a dreamer. Don't hide it from anyone. Don't hide it from anyone. Hey, would you believe me if I said we are here for a reason now? This is our life. This is what counts. This is for us. I will go anywhere for you. I will go anywhere for you.
President Trump has offered tough talk and mixed signals on the future of NAFTA.
Last month, after speaking with leaders from Canada and Mexico, he decided to renegotiate rather than terminate the agreement. Trade imbalance has been a big focus of President Trump's push to renegotiate NAFTA. We recently talked to a cattleman in Arizona who says overall, NAFTA has made his business more difficult.
Right on the crest, the high point of that, where those cedar trees are. My name is Jay Platt, and I am the manager of what we call Platt Cattle Company, LLC. It's a family-owned operation, myself, my wife, and 2 married sons. I think it's become a tougher and a tougher business. There are just a host of different regulatory burdens that consume your time as you deal with them that I think should be addressed. I am not against trade. I think that America has always been the world's greatest trading nation, and she always will be. But when you talk about trade, I think it has to be reciprocal in nature, which when you look at our trade deficits, whether it's beef under NAFTA or manufactured goods, we run these terrible deficits. Now we're into NAFTA for nearly 25 years. When you do a post-mortem examination, the jobs have failed to materialize, and in particularly with the cattle business, there has been a cumulative deficit, trade deficit in beef and live cattle to the tune of $32 billion during that time period. So have exports increased? Most certainly they have. But what USDA and the media will not tell us is that imports have increased at a faster rate than have the exports. So today, roughly 17% of our domestic beef consumption is imported beef. Other nations do not have the same health and regulatory standards that we do. According to a study done by USDA, 75% of the TB cases in the United States, bovine TB, I should clarify that, originated in Mexico. I am in favor of bilateral as opposed to multilateral trade agreements. I would like to see NAFTA go away as a multilateral agreement. I would like to see it go away as an appendage to the WTO as part of a negotiated trade agreement bilaterally with Mexico. I would like to see those issues dealt with, that the tuberculosis, until Mexico cleans up its act, so to speak, with TB and with brucellosis, it should not be allowed to export live cattle to the United States. I mentioned to you that 17% of our domestic consumption is actually imported in the form of live cattle or fresh meat. I think we could make that up, but we would have to change our policies. We've had policies, for example, that have driven ranchers off of federal lands in the West. And we'll get these cattle out of here as we brand them. We'll go south with them. It's an intellectually invigorating business, which I enjoy. I'm sticking with it. I'll never retire. NAFTA or no NAFTA.
As you've just heard, open trade between countries does pose challenges. Here to talk about some of those difficulties is Arnold Maltz, Associate Professor of Supply Chain Management at ASU's W.P. Carey School of Business. Jose Mendez, Professor of Economics, also at ASU, and Tomas Robles, Co-Executive Director of the advocacy group Living United for Change in Arizona. Good to have you all here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Arnold, we hear this a lot, that NAFTA works for everyone else but the United States. Is that valid?
Not in my perspective. I can show you a number of situations where we literally are, specifically in Arizona, very much helped by the NAFTA. I mean, the produce situation and the produce coming across the border is literally billions of dollars. And that would not be so easy without NAFTA, not at all. Not only that, the general move to make the border easier to cross is very much connected to NAFTA, and it's in the agreement. In fact, we're still working our way through that.
There are indeed a lot of supporters for NAFTA, one of the strongest being the junior senator from Arizona. Senator Jeff Flake recently spoke on the Senate floor about the many reasons he supports NAFTA. One of the most significant reasons is its impact on the U.S. economy.
U.S. trade with Canada and Mexico has more than tripled since 1993. That was before NAFTA came into effect. In 1993, U.S. foreign direct investment in Mexico was slightly more than $15 billion. In 2016, there was more than $92 billion in foreign direct investment. NAFTA increased U.S. agricultural exports to Canada and Mexico by 350%, supporting U.S. farmers and ranchers like those back in Arizona. Now, NAFTA has resulted in an integrated supply chain between the U.S. and other countries. Abandoning NAFTA would destroy these supply chains, making it harder for our country's private sector employers to grow and to do business.
So, Professor Mendez, a much different point of view than our rancher, Mr. Platt. Who's right? Is there a little bit of exaggeration on both ends here?
No, I think that I agree entirely with the previous commentators, and also with the statement.
Even though they both said different things.
They did say different things, but it may be the case. Now, I'm looking at it from the perspective of an economist who reads academic studies, assessing the costs and benefits and the overall effects on each economy. And from that perspective, all the studies are consistent. They all show that it's been a positive for all three economies, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. That's not to say that there haven't been what we call distributional effects. Every trade agreement does cause a dislocation. It causes a reshuffling of jobs, and there's definitely certain groups that have been harmed. And so I think that's what you get. If you talk to the individuals, of course, that have been harmed, they're on the news, they're going to be saying, yes, it was a bad thing. But I want to point out that every economic change, whether it's technological change, always causes this dislocation. I mean, try to think about professions that no longer exist or existed 20 years ago. Have you run into someone who is a clerk at a video store? How about milkmen? You know, those technological change displaces workers, causes harm, and of course, but overall, we benefit.
Okay, so Tomas, would killing NAFTA bring jobs back to the U.S.?
I don't believe it's that simple. To kill one trade agreement won't bring back those hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. To Professor Mendez's point, technology serves a role as well. But what we've seen, what individual stories, and also just from seeing how trade has affected on a micro level, we see a lot of times that these jobs that are lost aren't replaced with those same wages. And so you see that workers end up having to take jobs with much lower wages, end up having less protections for workers. If you go look at Mexico and these factories there, those companies are now do not have to abide by certain environmental standards. So what you see is the erosion of a quality of life from the workers' perspective and from a local perspective, because these workers now have to find their means of survival in other ways. And I think in a lot of ways, trade has been a reason for why economic inequality, both in the U.S. and Mexico, has risen, because these jobs no longer exist, these original manufacturing jobs. And the argument of saying that the tech jobs or the design jobs are still in existence, those are jobs that require advanced degrees, and when only about a third of the country here has a bachelor's degree, a lot of our people can't qualify for those. So it leaves a lot of workers in a huge bind with trade deals like this.
Professor Maltz, is there a way to renegotiate NAFTA in a way that doesn't cause further job losses of the kind that Tomas is talking about?
Well, certainly we could look at making things better in terms of trying to equalize trade, or in fact the original agreement had environmental safeguards in it. So the question is, what were those environmental safeguards actually taken care of or not? And there's also a labor piece to the original thing, the original agreement. So both of those things were considered in the original agreements. The question is whether the enforcement is being done in a way that is fair to everybody.
If we reverted back to pre-NAFTA, what do we revert back to?
What would probably happen is that tariffs would go back up. They would resort to what are called Schedule II tariffs that each country has. They would go from zero back to those levels, but those levels are already low. So in one sense, it may not be as devastating in terms of if the treaty were eliminated, in one sense. But if we went back to the agreement. But I wanted to say something about a point that Tomas made. I think that we're all in agreement that trade agreements do cause harm to individuals, cause job losses. What needs to be done is that there should be an enhancement. We have a trade adjustment assistance program that provides additional employment benefits to workers. We need a more concerted effort to expand that program, to expand retraining. The fact that we're going to lose jobs, we shouldn't stop that. I mean, that's part of a health churn, is part of a healthy economy. I believe in 1 year we lost 58 in 2014, 55 million jobs, but we gained 58 million. So that's a natural process of a healthy economy. We need to encourage mobility in a way that does not harm the workers.
So Tomas, would those kinds of enhancements that Professor Mendez is talking about satisfy the concerns that you have with NAFTA?
Well, it depends on the quality of jobs that come in. I mean, if a manufacturing job that pays $60,000 a year goes away, is it replaced by a service job that pays $10 an hour? And that's not going to replace or keep the economy going in the same pace that it's on before it lost that manufacturing job. And well, there's a reason why people were so much against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and part of it is the belief that these types of trade deals do reduce wages, do reduce employee protections, and in a lot of cases, environmental protections. And trade, while it's great for business, has not shown that it's great for the employee. I mean, we lost hundreds of thousands of jobs, both in the U.S. and Mexico also. And I think it also played a big role in our immigration issues now. A lot of those factories are located in the Arizona side of the border in Mexico. If those jobs are filled, what's to stop workers to try and find employment in the U.S.? And I think you combine that with, and this is slightly different topic, but you talk about immigration policies like gatekeeper and hold the line around the same time, you're funneling a lot of immigration or migration towards the Arizona desert.
We're kind of running out of time here, but do you agree with what Tomas is saying?
Well, I think, frankly, the job losses are inevitable. And the question of whether you can actually replace them with something similar is an open question because of the technology and because of the retraining requirements. Whether you can get somebody from a high school degree all the way up to a bachelor's degree level is a tough call, and especially if that person's in their 40s or 50s. So then that's a question that's beyond NAFTA. That one's beyond, that we're all facing with technology.
All very big questions. Thank you all for joining us on Horizonte to talk about it. And that is it for now. Thanks for joining us on this special co-production of Arizona Horizon and Horizonte. I'm Jose Cardenas.
And I'm Ted Simons, and you have a great evening.
Horizonte is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.